welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah. I am delighted to be with you on this Wednesday rather than Tuesday. More on that in a minute. As we get started, though, I do want to remind you to please like, follow, and subscribe on whatever platform you're either listening to or watching this episode on. As I keep saying, it really does help the algorithm. It gets this podcast out to more listeners and readers such as yourselves. If you would like to help the podcast in a monetary fashion, you may do so by going to gsmcpodcast.info. There you can leave a tip or donation, and that really does help not only this podcast, but the network as a whole. If while you're there, you are so inspired to leave a question or a comment, I'm happy to engage with those. I love hearing from you, so please feel free to leave me a comment or ask me a question. You see gsmcpodcast.info in the video next to me. You're also going to see it scrolling throughout the video, so if you need a reminder about that link. But again, if you want to support the podcast in a monetary fashion, you can use that link to leave a tip or a donation. As always, say it every week, mean it every week. Your support, whatever form that support takes, is always greatly appreciated. Past, present, future support, thank you so much for everything that you do and continue to do to support this podcast and the network as a whole. Greatly, greatly appreciated. So happy Wednesday. It's the middle of the week. It's hump day. It has been a bit of a crazy week for me so far. Actually, it started over the weekend. I worked all weekend, which was great. Actually, it really was great. I don't normally say that about working all weekend, but in this case, it was good. And then this week, Monday and Tuesday, had a lot of meetings, just wall-to-wall meetings a lot of the day. And so my schedule got a little crazy because of that 4 days of working a lot. And so this episode got pushed back. Also had physical therapy yesterday. Normally episodes would go up on Tuesday, but with the meetings and everything, I think my last meeting ended at 9:30 last night, plus the physical therapy. Been having some issues with my shoulder, but the nice thing is that my physical therapist is also one of my very best friends, so that is nice. She tortures me. We laugh a lot. She doesn't torture me. She's very good. I appreciate her very much. But, things are a little uncomfortable, and as they should be, because we're working through stuff, but it's really fun to get to see her and laugh. I don't get to see her nearly often enough, so it makes physical therapy worth it. Well, that and the healing, but more so seeing her. Anyway, thank you for being here on the day after the day we normally get together. That's why it's important to like, follow, subscribe, so you get those notifications, so you know when new episodes are out. I apologize, I'm a little croaky. I've been talking a lot for the last 5 days. As I said, lots of meetings. But let's talk about a book. The reason that you're here, that I'm here, that the author was just here. I am speaking this week with author Sadie Hoagland. She is a returning author. I will link the first interview she did in the description. That's an audio interview. That was before we switched over to video. So if you want to listen to that, we talk about her first novel, Strange Children. So if you want to listen to that, I will link that in the description of this episode. Do want to say, as I did at the end of the last episode when previewing this interview, this book and some of the conversation does deal with sexual assault, sexual violence towards women. And I want you to be aware of that. There's nothing graphic either in the book or the conversation, but it is brought up, it is referenced, it is the overarching idea, it's not an idea, but the overarching topic of sexual violence against women is part of this book. So you know you and what you need for self-care and your mental health better than anyone else. Just be forewarned, please act accordingly with regards to this episode. Thank you. As I said, Sadie Hoagland. The book is called Circle of Animals. Let me give you a description of this book. When her hippie mother Edie goes missing the same week Sky Richard is assaulted at work, Sky wants to run away from everything. Instead, Sky goes looking for her mother and finds an estranged grandmother, the cult she was born in, and an unlikely ally. But the most important thing she discovers in her mother's past is the strength she needs to face her own life. Circle of Animals tells the story of a woman, Sky, grappling with a sexual assault in her workplace and the disappearance of her troubled hippie mother the same week. As she searches for and uncovers her mother's story, she also discovers the larger story of the historically situated and gendered bodies of her mother and estranged grandmother. Drawing on ancient myth, the title refers to the zodiac, California counterculture of the last century, and current conversations about sexual violence. This novel asks us to think about how the inability to communicate violence done into the body is not just a symptom, but also a means through which violence spreads collaterally between women as silence and estrangement. As Skye looks for her mother, she must also find her own voice and courage to claim her agency. Again, that is the description of Circle of Animals. It is about identity, it is about relationship, it is obviously there are those themes of violence against women, sexual violence against women, but more than that, all of that is what happens. But the main part of the story is, yes, Skye trying to figure out what has happened to her mother, who has gone missing, but she starts to learn about herself and her mother. And so she learns about her own identity. She's figuring out her own identity. She's learning more about her mother and starting to see her mother as an adult, Skye as an adult, rather than Skye as a child looking at her mother. So that growing up that we do when we start to see our parents as people rather than just parent, right? So there's that. There's the relationship with her estranged grandmother and everything that led up to that, some things that we learn. And I pronounce the last name Richard, and Skye does as well, but her grandmother would pronounce it Richard, the French pronunciation. So interesting fact for you. But there's 3 generations of women who make up this story, although Skye is the only point of view, and we don't see as much of her mother and grandmother in flashbacks and those sorts of things. This isn't dual point of view or dual timeline, but there are a lot of flashbacks to different points in the past throughout the story that help shed light on Skye's story and journey at the point that she's at, helping her as she's figuring out her own identity, this relationship with her mother, etc. So that is Circle of Animals. The author is Sadie Hoagland. Let's go ahead and start that interview. Hi, Sadie. Welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm excited to be here.
I'm happy to have you back and to talk about your new novel, Circle of Animals. But before we do that, if you could just introduce yourself for people who maybe didn't hear the first interview or who are meeting you for the first time.
Yeah, sure. I'm Sadie Hoagland. I'm a writer, a fiction writer primarily, and a mom and a professor. So I teach at the University of Utah, and I have a 10-year-old and a 6-year-old. And so we're just sort of trying to do all of the things and balance all of the things. But most of my writing, this is my second novel, my third book. And all of them are quite different content and plot-wise, but the thematic that I kind of keep coming back to as a writer is this sort of effects of trauma on narrative and how we tell stories and how we tell stories about ourselves
Mm,
to ourselves. So sort of how we form our identity and the way that trauma both disrupts that, but also creates opportunities for sort of different spaces in language and different sort of lessons about ourselves. So that sort of ties all of the very different books together thematically.
yeah, and I'm sure that will come up as we talk about Circle of Animals because it's definitely present theme-wise. So can you give an overview of Circle of Animals?
Yeah, so the main character's name is Skye, and she's a 28-year-old. She's in landscape architecture in Marin, but she's actually in stonework design, which is a heavily male-dominated industry. And so she kind of finds herself in that world. And at the very beginning of the book, she experiences actually a sexual assault at work. Um, and finds out her mother, who is kind of this Edie, who's this sort of crazy character who is oftentimes unreliable, but she's kind of quote unquote missing at the beginning of the book. So Skye doesn't really know is she gone for reals or is she just kind of doing an Edie type of personality thing? But she decides that because of what's happened at work, she'll take some time off to go on a search for her mother. And this search leads her down sort of a path into her own past and into her mother's past and her past when she was a very young child. And so she thinks a lot about, throughout the book are sort of interwoven memories of her childhood with her mother. And then sort of she meets an estranged grandmother, and she is able to learn all sorts of things that she didn't know before and to sort of think about her mother from an adult perspective. But really, she's searching sort of for her own identity and agency as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. Her relationship with her mother is definitely complicated. But as we learn more about both of them, we start learning about Edie's relationship with her mother and kind of how this generational cycle is being played out and how that is. So when it comes to writing with those kind of flashbacks, how do you put everything together, deciding which part to tell where? What's the overall picture of that?
Yeah, so if anyone did read Strange Children, there were a lot of points of views, and most of the characters were moving forward in the novel, but one character was moving backwards through the novel, and so it was kind of complicated. So
Yeah.
as a writer that had matured a bit, I really wanted my audience to have a little bit of an easier time following the story. So I wanted to write mostly third person chronological. But I also wanted, because time I think is so um, just important in how we think about ourselves and um, the way that we form like who we are now based on what happened in the past, and not just our past, but our familial past. Sort of, it just felt like I needed to have those memories that she would look back on, because part of this story is kind of a growing up story where she's looking back and remembering feeling a certain way as a child and then seeing sort of maybe thinking about that. And this happens to us all, right? As adults, we kind of look back and we're like, what was going on at that moment? And we
Mhm.
have a totally different perspective on it as an adult. And so I wanted her to have those moments. And for the reader, because Edie is absent, largely throughout the book, I wanted the reader to be able to see glimpses of sort of why Skye had the impressions of Edie that she did. So it was important to have those moments where Edie's remembering the past. And then we do get to know Edie a little bit as well. But
I think it also juxtaposes Sky's memories of the past and then her learning more about Edie as an adult, because we look at our parents differently when we're adults, I
yeah,
think.
we're like, oh, they're people.
Right,
They're not just a
exactly. Yeah,
mom.
exactly.
Not just a minor
Um,
character in my life.
right, right. Hmm. As I mentioned earlier, at the beginning of this episode, part of Sadie's process of looking for her mother means that she starts learning more about her mother. And as she's learning more about her mother, she starts seeing her as kind of a whole person rather than just mom, just a parent. And that's one of the really interesting things to me about maturing, becoming an adult, is seeing your parents as other than parent. You know, if you thought they were perfect, you learn they're not perfect. If you thought they were infallible, you learn they're not fallible. If you thought they were horrible, maybe you learn that they're not as horrible as you thought. A lot of different things. And Sadie is figuring that out, that her mother is human in a lot of ways, and she starts to understand her more, which is an interesting part of her own process of figuring out her own identity. We're going to take our first break of this episode. When we come back, we'll be talking more about Skye as the main character. What about her might resonate with you, the reader? You're tuned into the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh,
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. As we start this second segment, your second and final reminder to go to gsmcpodcast.info if you'd like to help in a monetary fashion. You can leave a tip or a donation. Helps not only this podcast, but the network as a whole. As a reminder, that is gsmcpodcast.info. Thank you so much for all the support you've given the podcast, whatever form that support has taken throughout the years. Before the break, we were talking about Sadie's experience looking for her mother and her experience learning more about her mother and how that affects the way she sees her mother as a person, sees their relationship. So let's go ahead and return to the conversation with Sadie. In terms of Skye as the protagonist, what about her character do you think will resonate with readers?
Yeah, I think that, well, if anyone has a difficult relationship with their mother, this book is for you. No, I think we all understand being frustrated with our family. And I think we all understand how difficult communication can be within families. So I think that is part of her story. And then, of course, the growing up part that I just spoke to, the sort of understanding what it is to be an actual adult that's stepping away from the story that you were raised in and seeing it more objectively rather than in sort of a reactive way. That when you're older, part of gaining adult agency is that understanding that I have the ability to look objectively at this situation and this past and to understand it with sort of this less emotion. And so there's some of that to her. And she herself is asking, what does independence mean for her throughout the book? And not just with her mother, but with some friendships that she has and some people that she leans on. She's thinking a lot about her profession as well and getting back into work. So all of these things are, I think, questions that we all deal with. But I think we have so much work when we come out of childhood just trying to figure out what we want to take forward into our own lives and our own, if we're parents raising our own families, or our own journeys, and what we need to desperately shed.
Yeah.
what we just want to kind of hang out with and be okay with. So I think that there's some interesting conversations to be had around that.
Yeah. Yeah. And when we first meet Skye, you've already mentioned that she experiences a sexual assault at work. And this is right after she finds out her mother may or may not be missing. She's still confused about that. So you're an author that likes to, be mean to your characters. That's a really crappy week.
Yeah.
But the sexual assault also, there's different touch points throughout the novel in terms of men and women relationships, violence against women in different capacities. Can you talk a little bit about that thread?
Yeah, I think so I'm as I mentioned, I'm interested in trauma, and one of the things that I'm sort of continually coming back to is the sort of silence around it. And how toxic that silence can be, and not just trauma, but addiction, mental health issues, and the way that oftentimes within a family setting, that's what we're not talking about. That the thing that is the most damaging or the most sort of large emotionally feel in the room is the thing that's unnamed. And so I think I'm very interested in that. And I think, I started writing this book around the Me Too movement. This book takes place, I should have said, in the early 2000s. And so one of the things I was thinking about is how revolutionary that movement was, because it was just people naming what was happening all the time.
Yeah.
And once they started naming it, it was like a flood. The floodgates were open, right? And so we saw that there was this like cultural pathology around harassment, assault, misconduct in the workplace, and the silence around it. So I think part of the impetus for this novel was thinking about both that silence as professionally debilitating, but also something that sort of carries through, you carry your entire life, and you carry this sense of shame that sort of had been attached to assault and being a victim of assault or violence as a woman. And so how do we break out of that silence, and how do we find that agency was a question that I was really interested in. I don't want to be mean to my characters, but I also like to, you're right, I like to write about things that um, I think my natural instinct is actually to turn away from. And
Mm,
because I have that instinct, I really interrogate that instinct to turn away from it and say, like, why do I want to turn away from this? Like,
right.
even when I write the description of the book to someone, or even when I introduce the book, it is hard for me to say sexual assault. I want to say, because I'm like, oh, no one will want to read it.
Hmm.
Because it's hard. And I want to say something like sexual misconduct or sexual harassment, because that would sort of make it more palatable.
Hmm.
That's not what happens in the book at
Right.
all. So
Yeah.
it's not, it's a quick scene, and I think, bearable to read, but at the same time, I wouldn't want to continue that habit of our culture of downplaying what happens to women.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't think I'm trying to think it's not explicitly stated like what year it is, but there are indicators, like in one of the first scenes she has a flip phone. So I remember reading that and thinking,
Yeah.
oh, wait, what year are we?
Yeah.
Um, but then also just the time period of her mother's experiences in the early 70s and Sky's birth, you can tell it's not contemporary because she's not a 50-year-old woman at
Yeah.
the time. Um, did Were there other reasons for setting it more toward the beginning of the millennium, or basically that the Me Too and everything that was coming out then?
It was Me Too, but it was also so the time period is pre-Me Too. That was important. I was one of the things that drew me to this book was the 1960s and 70s counterculture in
Yeah.
California, which was this really interesting. I mean, there were hundreds of cults sprouting up. There was all sorts of music coming out. There were protests. It was a wild kind of turbulent cultural time, especially in California. There were a rash of serial killers. There was just some really odd phenomenon. So I was sort of obsessed with that. So it was
Yeah.
important to me that the mother be the age where she would have had it, so that was part of it. It was just setting it back so that it would be the mother in that time period. But then also I will just sort of totally out myself as like the like plot device that a cell phone is. It's a lot to like, so there are all these things that you see in old movies, and you're like, why don't they just call for help? Like, why don't they text somebody? And they can't because they don't have phones, right? Like, so
Yeah. Yep.
something to be said for like that kind of problem solving that cell phone just makes so easy narrative wise, like, oh,
Hmm.
all they have to do is look this up. They could literally Google this right now, right?
Right. Yep.
Yeah, then they have to solve their problem in different ways. So some of it is completely that.
Yeah. Yeah, although when I think flip phone, then I have a little bit of PTSD about actually texting, and
Oh
you
my
had to
God.
punch the button 3 to 4 times to get certain
Well,
letters.
and which is why you only texted, where are we meeting? Or like
Yeah,
half the time you just called because
it wasn't a novel, and or
yeah. Or,
maybe that's why I like voice notes so much now. I'm
yeah.
traumatized from texting.
Yeah, no, I have these dreams where I'm sort of like someone's in the house and it's an emergency and I need to call 911, and I'm like hiding in a closet, and I keep trying to like text 911, but it's texting in the word like banana. And it's just like it's like this technology dream where like it won't do
Wow.
what I want it to do.
Wow, technology anxiety dreams. That's a
Yeah.
yeah. Wow. Definitely haven't thought about texting on a flip phone in a minute. I don't miss it. I really don't miss pushing. What was the Q you had to push 5 times or something? I don't even remember. It was a lot, but it definitely cut down on the length of the texts that you sent. Technology is fun and it's interesting the way it evolves, but I can understand why Sadie would have technology related anxiety dreams. I haven't gotten there yet. I have a lot of different anxiety dreams. Maybe I shouldn't have said that out loud. Hopefully, I haven't just now. I'm going to start having technology related anxiety dreams. We'll see. I'll keep you posted. We're going to take our next break of this episode. When we come back, we'll be talking more about the title of the book and what it means and its significance. You're tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with Sadie Hoagland. Before the break, we were talking about technology, especially around the early 2000s and the joy of texting on a flip phone, along with technology anxiety dreams. Let's go ahead and return to the conversation with Sadie. Can we talk a little bit more about the title? There's references, of course, to the zodiac, which is important to Edie, but are there other reasons you chose that for the title?
Yeah, for sure. So I think I had a hard time finding a title for this book, and I kept looking in the mythology and in a more specific sense, because the myth of Cassiopeia comes up several times. The myth of Demeter and Persephone comes up. And so I was looking at these specific myths, and then I decided to kind of zoom out. And I found out that zodiac is translated as a Greek word for circle of animals, which of course is the circle of constellations in the sky that go around us. And that really fit really well, because one of the characters in the book, who I won't tell you too much about, is really obsessed with sort of predestiny, and sort of that these things are sort of predestined towards us. And so we're in this kind of circle of predestiny. So we are not deciding things for ourselves. And so it's kind of this question of free will. But for me and my main characters, that really comes a question of sort of epigenetics and generational trauma, like, right? So even if it's not predestined by the stars and our birth sign, like what is predestined by just the story we're being born into? And so I think that was an important aspect of the circle for me. But I also am always thinking about time, especially in narrative, as circular. I think so many characters, even in books that we consider chronologically linear, are making these sort of circular returns to their past or to their self. One of my mentor, Melanie Ray Tone, talks about characters in circles of redemption. And I certainly thought about Edie as a circle of redemption, her journey, that she is trying to make right a wrong from the past, and that is defining her journey at this moment. So I think those things that, like I said, I keep coming back to this, so I'm on my own circular journey as a writer, but I do kind of think that our vision of narrative and time is so much more broadened when we think of it as nonlinear. And I think with the stories that we think about telling ourselves, that's incredibly important too. So I think thinking about not just the stories, like the family stories, but the cultural stories, right? So when we are struggling, we come up into spaces where we have, like, we return to a story that is in our family, right? And this is actually like a child psychology thing too. That kids, if they can tell stories about their family, they're faring better. Like if they can say, "Oh, we're this type of family," or "We're this type of family." So it's really important to be able to do that. But that goes back into generations too. So the generational part of the story is important as well.
Yeah. When you were thinking about this book, when you first started putting together your ideas, were those ideas of myth, like Demeter and Persephone and Cassiopeia, did you start out knowing you wanted to talk about that, or did that kind of develop as you developed Sky and Edie's story?
That kind of developed, Cassiopeia developed really quickly, because it's one of the constellations I've known since I was really young, and really thought the story was strange. And then it's interesting because there's like all these different versions of the story. And so, and the idea of it is just like this woman being punished, right? It's like she's hanging in the sky. So like throughout my childhood, I was like, oh, this is lady that's up there hanging upside down.
Yeah.
And like, as you get older, you're like, did she really deserve that? Like that's a
Yeah.
big punishment for eternity. So you start to kind of think about it. But Demeter and Persephone was a natural choice because of the mother-daughter. And that is also, I think, and that's a searching story too. For those of you that don't know it, Persephone is taken into the underworld by Hades, and her mother Demeter is looking everywhere for her. And then finally, Zeus admits that he's let Hades take her into the underworld, and so she goes down to find her. So it's a mother searching for a daughter, but it's definitely has themes related to the book as well.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because we do get just Sky's perspective, point of view. So we learn bits and pieces about not only her mother, but her grandmother. And there's one line it's at the end of the chapter where she meets her grandmother, and she says she realizes that they both know Edie very well, just from opposite sides of the chasm. So Edie, in this case, is very central, but we don't see much. We really don't see her. So can you talk a little bit more about, you've touched it briefly, but can you talk a little bit more about Edie's centrality and the fact that you chose, not to kind of have her point of view?
Yeah, I think well, there's that when you have three women generations, right? Like that is such an interesting like development of these kinds of family traits and sort of what gets handed down and what doesn't. And for Sky growing up, her missing link was her grandmother. So that was the missing link for her. She was estranged, they were estranged from her. So when she finds her, she's getting this kind of picture of her mother, like you said, from this completely other side of her life, from her childhood, and from her young adultness. And so she's kind of getting the story of before she was born. But I think Edie, for me, I thought that her character wasn't super conducive to being a character that's organized enough to follow and tell the story of herself, until she does, which she does at one point in the book. She writes a letter, and you get to see that letter that explains things to Sky. But she is not, part of her personality is that she is very sort of whimsical, spontaneous, and she is very she doesn't think things through. And this is one of Sky's main criticisms of her. And so I think part of me felt that, I didn't want her to be, and this is part of her journey as a character, she is kind of trying to change her life story from one of a victim to one of sort of an agent, right? And so she's also looking for her own agency. But I wanted the story mainly to be about how Sky sees her. And I didn't know. I felt like Edie would take because part of her personality is that she's a narcissist too.
Yeah.
And so I just was like, I don't trust her with this, with a large point of view.
Yeah.
It was a big part of it for sure.
Yeah. She would definitely be an unreliable narrator
Yeah,
if
she would kind of derail things.
But she's also interesting because she really represents that the generational portion of things where she is desperately trying to not be her mother. And Sky still has, still rebels against her and wishes things were different. And how each generation tries to do better, and we're all just kind of fumbling through life trying to figure things out.
Yeah. No, I think that's really a large sort of statement that I want the readers of this novel to think about, is that we all try to do better, right? And so that's the thing about Edie, is that, and this is what Sky is starting to realize, is that she really is doing her best. Like this is her at her best. And because of all the things that have happened to her, this is what she has to offer. But that she is actively trying to be a good parent, even though Sky is always kind of saying you're not the good parent.
Right. Yeah.
To some extent. But like I said, she's kind of a narcissist, so
yeah. So a few moments ago, Sadie was talking about the letter that Edie writes, that you read at one point during the book, and it really does emphasize maybe or highlight that Edie, while her point of view would be interesting and it would add a different element to the novel, it's still, she is a narcissist in many ways. She is an unreliable narrator in many ways. And even with the letter, there, Sadie does a great job of showing Edie's character through this letter, and that there's still things left out that would be helpful in the letter, in the type of letter that Edie is writing. So I thought that was a good addition to the book to help show more of Edie's story, but also show a little bit more of why her point of view isn't included, because it would have been more unreliable and maybe probably detracted from the overall story and Sky's own journey. So we're going to go ahead and take our final break of this episode. When we come back, we'll be talking a little bit about the research that Sadie did in the writing of this novel. You're tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back. Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and the conclusion of my conversation with author Sadie Hoagland. Before the break, we were talking about Sky's mother, Edie, and the fact that she does not have a point of view in this story, but she does have she has a little bit of a point of view through the letter. But we were also talking about generations, specifically the 3 generations represented in Sky and her mother and grandmother, but also generations in that each generation works to maybe change things they didn't like that they learned from the previous generation, and that is present here. You know, we're all just trying to make our way in the world. We learn from previous generations things that we like, dislike, want to change, want to improve upon, etc. So that is another theme in this book. Let's go ahead and return to the conversation with Sadie.
Yeah.
Were there particular types of research that you did for the book that you maybe were unexpected?
Yeah, so I went down the rabbit hole on the California counterculture. We went up to Santa Cruz and spent some time there because I thought about doing some setting there and I didn't end up. But one of the most joyful memories I have of writing the book is when I was pregnant with my youngest. My dad and mom drove me and my 4-year-old around San Francisco. And we drove all over. We drove around every neighborhood that I wanted to put in the book. We went to the park. We went to the pond that is in the book at the beginning of the book. And I just really spent some time making setting notes. And then Carmel, that's in the book, is a place that I've spent a lot of time. My grandparents had a home there. And so that was a really familiar environment to me as well. So that was kind of a natural place when I definitely read a lot of myths, reread a lot of myths, and I definitely thought a lot about sort of survivor narratives and trauma narratives and how we tell those stories. But so, for example, Edie's narcissism is sort of, well, all of her personality is an effect of having had a sexual assault when she was a teenager, right? And not being able to sort of mature past that point, having it really kind of halt her development. So some of that is just sort of psychological research.
Yeah, absolutely. This is Slightly off topic, but when you're talking about driving around San Francisco, I went to grad school in the Bay Area in kind of around the same time period that the book is set. So that was nostalgic, but also going to San Francisco, and I don't know if it's still there because it's 20 years later, but at the time on the corner of Haight and Ashbury, there was a Gap. And I thought there should not be a Gap on the corner.
Yeah, that name, yeah, for sure.
Um, so I have no idea what's there now, but it didn't seem very 70s counterculture to me.
Yeah, no, well, it like produces it like fetishizes it, right? So like there's all the shops that are supposed to make you feel like you're in that era, but it's really
Yeah.
just selling things.
Yeah. Um,
Buy
are
some news
you
statistics.
are you currently working on anything new?
I am. I'm working on a novel about a group of women who decide to become gun owners together. So they have no experience with firearms and they decide to go into that world. And they
Hmm.
all have different reasons, but a lot of the book is thinking about the tension between sort of protection and the idea of protecting yourself as a woman. That's one of the largest new gun ownership populations is women.
Yeah.
And then the sort of the tension between that protection element and the sort of perception of safety. Like when do we perceive ourselves as safe, which I actually think is more relevant than safety for like thinking about how we conduct ourselves through life, right? Because if we feel safe, we conduct ourselves one way, and if we don't feel safe, we don't.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah,
Interesting.
that's been a lot of research, and that's
I was
been a really wild world.
Yes, I was just thinking that would be
Yeah.
I would definitely have to research a lot for
Yeah,
that story.
I am like my characters. I am not part of that world. I didn't know anything about it previous to jumping into this book, but yeah, it's been really interesting. So
Yeah, thank you. What have you been reading lately when you have time to read?
yeah, so I facilitate a lit and healthcare group through the Center for Medical Health Ethics, Humanities, and Arts through the University of Utah. So a lot of the books that I read are with the idea of talking about it in the context of like doctors and nurses and healthcare staff. And so we just read Small Rain by Garth Greenwell this year is one of the books we've read, and then The Woman by Kristen Hanna.
Mhm.
But Small Rain was by far like it's been my favorite one that we've read. It's a COVID narrative of illness, and it's just
Mm,
really, really, but it's really poetically, lyrically written. So I highly recommend it.
yeah,
But
it's
yeah,
so
do you have any
interesting to me.
recommendations?
Uh,
I just finished a book, so I'm in that space of like, what's next?
it's so interesting to me that we're now getting books, novels, stories set during COVID that we're far enough past, and it's interesting to go back to that with a little bit
Yeah.
of distance.
It is, and it's like, but it's weird too how quickly you forget things. Like
Mhm.
I like the beginning of the book, they're talking about how careful they were being and like wiping down their groceries. I was like, oh, we did that. We
Yeah.
totally did
Yep.
that.
Yep.
And yeah, just how terrifying it was when we knew nothing like
Yeah.
about transition, or we just knew that we'd stay in our house.
Yeah, yeah, it goes back to what you were saying about safety and the perception of safety and where they meet and where they're different.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and if people want to know more about you and your books, website, and any social media you're active on.
Yeah, it's at Sadie Hoagland is my Instagram, and I'm active on that. And I check Facebook as well, and that's just Sadie Hoagland as well. And then sadiehoagland.com. It's a nice thing about an uncommon name. It's
Yeah,
just
yes.
words. It's just my name smushed together on all
But
of them.
yeah, you can actually get it. It's not been taken by multiple
Yeah,
other
I didn't
people.
have to do Sadie Hoagland one.
Yes. Yeah.
But I do have a contact form on my website, and I do respond to people's questions. So
Okay.
yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Sadie, is there anything that we haven't talked about, especially in terms of the book that you want to make sure you highlight during our time together?
Yeah, no, I just think well, reading is so important, and it's so hard right now because we're all completely distracted by a million different things. And we're also living in this sort of content saturated world where everything's competing for our attention. But I just want to suggest that reading literary fiction, literature, well thought out essays that took a lot of brain power to write, and giving them deep attention is in itself an act of resistance to this
Mm,
sort of fast-paced culture that we're and sort of atmosphere that we're sort of feeling the onslaught of constantly right now.
yeah, yeah, very good point. And reading outside your own circle, so you're not just
Yeah.
in an echo chamber with your reading, I think is important as well.
Yeah, for sure. And just that there is really compelling intellectual writing on all sides of every, there's nuance in every space, right? And I think I've been telling my students one of the big lies they're being told is that there are these two sides to every, and that's not true. And so I think fiction does an excellent job of kind of showing the gray areas, but I think as we get into more surreal spaces, nonfiction does as well.
Yeah, yeah, I think we definitely live in the gray more than anything,
Yeah.
um, even though we want it sometimes to be black and white. Um,
Yeah.
but well, Sadie, thank you so much for taking time. I know you've got a busy day ahead of you, so thank you for talking to me about the novel and for returning to the podcast. I appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much, Sarah, for having me and for helping to promote the book. And I just really appreciate it. And for doing your podcast too and reading.
Thank you. Thank you again to Sadie for joining me, for returning to the podcast to talk about Circle of Animals. It was great to talk to her a second time about this book. And if you are a fan of complicated family relationships, of journeys of discovery and identity, it's not historic fiction, even though it takes place 20-ish years ago, so slightly different time period, but also in the 70s, so you get that counterculture from the 70s, the California counterculture. So in that respect, there is a little bit of historical fiction in the novel. If any of this is appealing to you, then of course check out this book. And Sadie talked a bit about writing through the lens of trauma and how trauma affects stories and our lives and our reaction and the way we interact with the world, etc. So if you are at all interested in that topic, check out this book, Circle of Animals, but also her first book, Strange Children. Again, I'll link that episode in the description of this one. So if you want to listen to that interview and learn more about her first novel as well, you can do so. But if this sounds intriguing to you, of course, check out the book. Leave reviews. That always helps authors, helps podcasts, but leave reviews of the books that you read, because it really does help authors to get those books to more people, so more people can read what they work so hard to create and put out into the world. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode. I hope that you will join me next time. I will be speaking with J.W. Jarvis about his book Artificial Agent. We're back into the world of thrillers. This time it is a techno thriller, which I can't even remember the last techno thriller interview I did. So I'll have to think about that and see if I can remember what book that was. But Artificial Agent, this is, as I said, a techno thriller, military thriller as well. So there's some of that. So please do join me for this conversation next time with J.W. Jarvis. In the meantime, if you are, here's the book we talked about this week. Click the wrong button. If you are a fan of this podcast, please do like, follow, subscribe on whatever platform you are listening to it or watching it on. Again, helps the algorithm, gets the podcast out to more people. Also, as I said about your favorite books, leave a review. Does not have to be complicated. Can be one sentence. Once again, the world is run by algorithms. These things that may seem inconsequential, liking, following, subscribing, leaving a review help the algorithm, help get the podcast out to more readers, and I greatly appreciate all of that support. If you're on social media and want to find the podcast on social media, you can find it on Facebook, X, Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky. And just like the link that I gave you at the beginning of the first and second segments, if you want to find me on social media, I mean the podcast, but by extension me, and ask any questions or leave a comment, I would be happy to hear from you. Tell me what you're reading. Tell me what you want to read. Give me all the good book tea about what you have been reading and how big your TBR is. I hope your week is going really well. Whatever the week is throwing at you, though, my wish is always the same, and I hope that you have plenty of time to get yourself lost in a good book. Thank you so much.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to